Hey, welcome back. This should be about lecture 7 for ET 454 Project Management. I'm Dr. James McCurian. I'm the owner of this lecture. So in this lecture, I'm going to talk about scheduling, including work breakdown structure, budgeting, and planning. I'm going to talk about some project management software that can be used, talk about budget reserve analysis. I'm going to do a recap of type of estimates that are used, especially when you're doing your work breakdown structure and your budgeting. Talk about quality management plan, and then I will continue on a little bit more about communications plan. So there's additions to that. So where are we? Here's the project phases. You have the initiation phase, the planning phase, execution phase, monitoring and control, and closing. Well, we've already been to the point where you've had a kickoff meeting and you're getting to the execution. So now we're having our project team get together and they are doing the work breakdown structure, and they're worrying about budgeting and issues like that to get the project going. So here's a quick recap of the kickoff meeting. We provided a project overview, talked about a project scope, discussed timelines and milestones, outlined who was going to do what and the responsibilities. We had a communication plan together for our stakeholders. Then we talked about workflows and the software we might use, and did a risk assessment and how we would mitigate the risks that were encountered. And then we talked about having follow-up scheduling meetings and sending out emails to let everybody know, especially executive stakeholders, that we had the kickoff meeting. So your project team is going to work on some of these components for your project. So they're going to examine the executive summary, especially the project scope and the project charter and the business case too. They'll ensure the project outcomes that they are decided upon align with the organizational requirements. They're going to define the project boundaries. They're going to discuss the deliverables and even an acceptance criteria. They'll determine the project schedule. They will outline tasks, milestones, and dependencies. They'll work on the project budget. That's a big one. They'll do estimates for labor, for other resources, materials, and key expenses. They will discuss and develop a quality management plan that establishes your quality standards and the processes for ensuring quality. And they will also develop a communication management plan. Now, you already had that before, and in a lot of cases, you're just going to carry over from what you put together from either the feasibility study or the project charter and use it here, or you may have additions or inclusions to the original communication plan. Furthermore, the team will develop a resources management plan. Now, something good about a resource management plan, I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but it allocates your people, your equipment, and other resources towards the project. If you're using a software, for instance, MS Project, or even something like Smart Sheets, it facilitates you to develop that, and it's a very easy process, and it allows you because it helps out with cost management. Your project management team will be developing a risk management plan. That's identifying potential risks, identifying their impacts, and developing strategies to mitigate or address these risks when they occur. I think I've already talked about this a little bit before. And so, further, a stakeholder management plan. I've already talked about this before. A lot of times that can just be carried over from either the feasibility study or the business case or what have you, and it's already good to go for this portion for your team. There's also development of a procurement management plan. That was a tongue twister there. And it is used for defining the process you're going to use if you need to acquire goods and services or even contract with external vendors and things of that nature. So it's pretty important. And then finally, your project management team is, if they haven't already decided or it's still in the works, you'll be deciding whether you're going to use iterative, incremental, or hybrid, or waterfall, or phase gate, or stage gate type of plans. You may also have, if it's iterative or incremental or hybrid, you'll have a change management plan, because these three are conducive to lots of change. You have to accommodate for them. So those go with agile type of projects, which are iterative, incremental, or hybrid. And they must be added to a predictive approach project if indeed there's a consideration of any changes. And then finally, there is the development of the deliverables for the project. So project scheduling, what's the steps? Well, first you review the project scope. You look at your project goals, your deliverables, and the boundaries for the schedule. You identify the phases. You create deliverables for those phases. And then you create your work breakdown structure. That means you're going to provide detail to the things you're going to do during those phases. You'll also provide a work breakdown dictionary, and that is just providing a dictionary of the terminology that's involved with the work that's going to be done during the phases. You'll identify task dependencies. You'll have your must start dates and your must finish dates and things of that nature. And I've already talked about some of the types of dependencies that occur in previous lectures. You'll estimate your durations. Favorite activity or a favorite estimation technique to use is the 3-point estimate. I'll go over that later in this lecture. And you will also want to sequence using a logical, rational method for the things that need to be done for your project. Then you'll develop your schedule. A lot of times you initiate it with a Gantt chart. Gantt chart's simple and easy to use. You can do it on a piece of paper. You can do it in MS Project or in MS Word and so forth. And then you may want to use a project management software, again like MS Project, Project Libre, which is a free download. I think I've talked before in other lectures. And then you will identify the schedule and the dependencies to determine the critical path. And I've already talked about the critical path. That's the longest length for your activities, and then within it, because you have the longest length, you're going to determine things that are slack or float, and those impact your schedule. What I'm showing here is just doing an outline, and notice the key terminology of initiation. So what you're doing is developing a hierarchical chart to put your thoughts together. So you have initiation phase, have your planning, have execution, and this can all be within the project, the things that is going to occur during the project phase. Okay, then the control, and then the closure of your project. And so what I'm showing over here is a work breakdown structure for doing a construction job, which would most likely be a waterfall type of project. So, project scheduling, making a work breakdown structure dictionary. In MS Project, a work breakdown structure dictionary can be accessed by going to the Project tab, then WBS, and then define code. Kind of weird terminology for it, but that's the terminology that you use. And then you can put the specifics in there. You put comments, more or less is how it's set up, and that would you can put definitions and things of that nature. This can also be made in Excel and transferred to your MS Project file. And notice there is other aspects in something like MS Project where there's comments, there's notes, and there's customized field. And I provide these links for a little bit further investigation by you if you'd like to look into it. Within a work breakdown dictionary, you may have the following things in it. You have a WBS identifier, a unique identifier and title for the element. You'll have a description. Within the description, you might define the boundaries, provide assumptions, constraints, and the scope of that element. You would assign possibly who is responsible for that task in the work breakdown structure. This correlates to the RACI chart that you've done in a homework assignment, and it can be used here. Then you can have the deliverable, and that's pretty much saying, here's what you're going to get when we're finished with this task or activity. You'll have an acceptance criteria. Oftentimes that's a checklist to say, did you do this? Have we this? Have we this? There will be a duration, and that's the amount of time that you are scheduling or plan to use to get an activity done, leading to a next activity. You have milestones, and those are just key things that happen that should be called out to let everybody know and go, hey, this has actually happened. It can be during a phase, it can be an actual activity itself, or a task itself during a phase, but that's what a milestone is. Then you have your budgeting allocation, or your element. That's going to have some type of number value attached to it, or dollar value, I should say. And then again, the risks that are associated with that activity. Some important aspects to project management, so project scheduling. There is the resource management. It considers the available capacity of people and their equipment. So you might have to apportion your equipment or your people. You might have 3 people working on a job, and you're saying that I'm going to apportion 33% of this job to this activity. Then you may have to pull them away, and then it comes down to a 50-50 if you only have 2 people left. We already talked about the milestone tracking, and then scheduling and monitoring. And remember, in project management for scheduling, a milestone is a significant event or checkpoint in a project's timeline that helps track the progress and guides the team. It's not simply the ending of phases. That is something that really needs to be pointed out. I'm pretty sure you're going to find something like that when you take the exam. If you take the exam, you need to have that distinction and understanding. If you choose to use MS Project, here are some tutorials that can be used. So I provide the links, and I just did that to, help you out. I don't want to say it's the standard software to use, but it comes with your MS Office type of suite, and so it's there. And if you're not aware of how to use it, this provides quick tutorials for how to use it. Okay, so I'm going to provide a brief iteration of the steps when you're doing the scheduling, and really it's to get to these points to remember. You're going to define the project, the activities, you're going to develop the project schedule, you're going to have phases and milestones, and that gets to my point here. So a milestone represents a single point in time. It marks completion of a task or event. It's used to track progress, and it really has no duration. It's just a road marker that you pass, and you go, yeah, we've passed that milestone. And then there are phases. Phases represent a distinct period of time. It is a collection of related tasks, and it may define, typically it does have a defined start and end date. And it often signifies a shift in the project focus. Now, I point these out because if you're taking the certifying exam, you really need to know these things, because again, you'll get questions and they tend to end up being a word salad, and you got to stop and think, okay, what is it they're really asking me here? So that's why I point that out. Okay, so once you develop the schedule, the next thing you want to get your critical path. We've already done one critical path method. Again, I'm showing you a link here that you may want to investigate for further analysis of how to do critical path, and you have to determine your dependencies. Okay, so what we're seeing here, just quick overview. I've already discussed this in other lectures, but if you missed it or you don't remember, I'm going to go through it here. So what are dependencies? There's about 4 different types of dependencies. There's start to start, start to finish, finish to start, and finish to finish. And I have a little visual here. You may want to stop and go back through this to brush up on it. All right, so I'm providing here just some scheduling software options. There is Jira, there is Gantt chart software, there's modern day, Trello, Rike, Hive, Forecast, Procore, Primavera, Rike Now, Project Manager, and one that is very conducive, I think I mentioned before, is Smartsheets. Here's some links to these software. So here's Smartsheet, Project Libre, MS Project 365, Gantt Pro, Easy Project, at Atlassian, and then Scrum Desk. Obviously, Scrum Desk is going to be for iterative or incremental software, especially when you're doing a software type of project. So now we're getting to project budgeting, the planning portion. There's some terminology you definitely need to be aware of and know, because you're most likely going to be tested on it. I know when I took it, I ran into these terminologies. All right, so looking at this, I provided this visual representation. Sorry, my face is in here, but this is nothing but green behind here, just so you know. So here's the stages to budgeting. And it goes from left to right, and it's that way because you have to consider the lowest common denominators in the projects, your activities, all the way to the overall project cost. So a activity contingency reserve is based upon your activity estimates. Okay, so you have costs. So if you have a plumber come in and you have 2 bathrooms and a kitchen, those are individual activities within those 3 areas. Those 3 areas might be lumped together to be a work package estimate. So if you're going to put in a bathroom, you got to put in the plumbing with the shower, bathtub, the sink. That might cost X amount. If you have another bathroom that's a little bit more elaborate, so ensuite with the master bedroom, okay, that might have another amount that's a little bit more than the initial amount. That's a Y amount. Then you have your bathroom, or you have your kitchen, and so the plumbing for that, that might be another estimate. So, and then what you would have, once you get those cost estimates together, you would decide on what level of contingency reserve we would have to address things that were not foreseen or not planned for. And you might want to, in the project, go, okay, we're going to go with 10%. So if my first bathroom costs $10,000 or costs $1,000, and we go with 10%, I might have a contingency for that activity of $100. For the other bathroom, it might cost $4,000, and we will have contingency of 10%, and again, that would be $400. Now that would be really cheap, since I just did a bathroom myself. It was roughly about $10,000. 5 years ago we did a bathroom, it was about $5,000 to $6,000. So yeah, so did we have contingency for that? No, we got straight fixed priced contract, and we were good to go with the second bathroom. The first bathroom we did, we ran into problems, and so I had ballparked what it would cost, And then I'm glad I said, I'm going to have a little bit of a set aside for this. And that set aside ran into about $500. So that's what it's involved with your activity cost estimates and then contingencies for it. So those three areas might go together, putting in plumbing for 2 bathrooms in your kitchen, and that would be considered a work package cost. So you lump sum those all together. And then you might have a contingency reserve even for that, things that you didn't consider, and those would also be known as a set aside for things we hadn't considered. Now it can be as simple as having the separate activity costs or activity contingency reserves, add them together, and that comes up with our contingency reserve. But we have to be aware of, this is terminology that goes with this goes with this, and they do actually, if you take the test for certification, they will use that type of terminology, so you should be aware of that. Then you would have your control counts. What is a control count? Well, control count is a summary level work breakdown structure and component where cost, schedule, and scope are planned, monitored, and controlled. Really, they align with your earned value management system. So when you think of the term control account, think of earned value management. It's going to go right to there, and you're going to go and say, okay, number one, is this within scope if we're doing bathroom B, okay, and you go, yeah, we're going to put these fixtures in, we want this type of sink and lights and et cetera, et cetera. And then you might have a schedule issue, so we're considering scheduling and scheduling performance. And then you might have costs and cost performance. We already talked about that with variance and performance and things of that nature. So you should think of a control account as a mini project within the larger project. It's for keeping track of the progress with it. Okay? All right, next thing to talk about with this budget components would be your cost baseline. So that was, I just used the bathrooms for that, but we'd have to put in electrical with our house. And so again, we go back to those activity costs, then you'd have your work package costs, and then we consider our controls versus how we're going to monitor those things. And then we'd add all of those things together, and that would go with a cost baseline. Okay, so initially, cost baseline might be a higher level value. You want to build a house. You don't want to go under $300,000 or go over $300,000 for building the house. So you work backwards to that and go, okay, here's my activity costs, here's my work packages, and that will give me a cost baseline. And then you add all of those things up. So these can be multiple things with your activities, your contingencies, and your control accounts. And then you get to that overall cost baseline. And again, instead of using 10%, you might want to go with 15% or 20%. Okay, so we're including what the house cost, with the stick, pouring foundation, and so on and so forth. And you might want to go with 15%. So with $300,000 house, we might consider we will have a management reserve of $45,000. And that would all fall under the project budget. So how does it all go together? Well, I've provided this graphic on this slide so you have a visual. I'm a visual learner. A lot of people are visual learners. And so it kind of puts things together for you. So here's my activities. They fall under a work package. So I'm showing you the arrow where they go together. Okay. And so I'm showing you where it goes with the definitions. And then we would have cost accounts and so on and so forth. So that's why I've thrown that on there. You can stop here. You can look it over. Anyway, let's move on. So management reserve and cost baseline. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth here. So in project management, management reserve and cost baselines are critical components of project budgeting and cost control. Here's the breakdown. Cost baseline is the approved version of the time phase project budget, including any management reserves. It is used to measure and monitor cost and performance throughout the project. Key points: it includes all authorized budgets allocated for project work. Those are called performance measurement baselines. Just word salad terminology. It all goes back to the term baseline. Okay? It excludes management reserves. It's used for earned value management, forecasting, and performance. It's created from your work breakdown structure, your cost estimates, your schedule, and your contingencies. Here's an example. So, if your total cost estimate is $500,000, then our cost baseline is $500,000. Pretty simple. Continuing on with management reserve and cost baseline. Management reserve is a budget set aside for unseen work or for unknown unknowns, risks or events that occur and they're impacting your project. Key points: they're not a part of the cost baseline, but part of the total project budget. They're controlled by senior management or the project sponsor, who often comes from the executive management stakeholders. Access is typically required from by formal approval, and then they're often a percentage of 5 or 10%. So here's an example. If the cost baseline for the project's $500,000 and we're going to use 10% management reserve applied, that would be if we have $500,000 and we have 10%, it'd be $500,000 plus $50,000. So our total projected budget is $550,000. Now, I hope I beat this to death, but I do that because I encountered this. I had questions like that, and you really got to stop and think. And I look back at my results and I go, "Oh yeah, I got that terminology backwards," and it impacted getting the correct answer. So that's why I've focused on this, and I hope this helps out. Okay, this is just kind of restating what we've already looked at. It's just another way to look at it. Rather than going from small side left to right, it's going from big side right to left. And so we're seeing here just some terminology: rainy day fund going with contingency reserves, and it's talking about how your reserves are flowing upward. So I just threw it in because it was cool. Moving on. Okay, so putting this all into perspective. Okay, we've got a project scope, developed the work breakdown structure. We're doing a resource estimation, and resource estimation involves using estimating techniques. Now I've got cost on there, but these can be used for time and money and resources too. Okay, we've already talked about these: the analogous, the parametric, and bottom-up estimates. And we have contingency planning, that it's a little bit separate, but this is part of the budgeting process. And then you'll have a review and approval, and typically that's going to be your project team's going to look it over. Then you go back to the project sponsor, and the project sponsor is going to go, yeah, okay, we'll live with that, and let's move on. So I've already talked about this before in previous lectures, but it applies here, so I'm going to go over it here again and go over it briefly. So here are the 4 types of estimation techniques. First off is analogous estimating, also considered top-down. So what we do, we look at past projects, and we try to find a project in the past that was similar to the one we were doing now, and we use those values, and then you work backward for your work breakdown structure and the activities that go into it to provide your analysis for time and costs. Then you have parametric. This is using historical data and some statistics involved, and doing an analysis that way to figure out what is the range of values that we're going to have from high to low to the target value. Then we have 3-point. 3-point is, in essence, pretty much parametric, and it's taking a look at the pessimistic or worst case, the optimistic, which is best case, and then most likely. And so it uses a formula with your estimate is your optimistic plus 4 times most likely plus the pessimistic value for cost or for time, and then dividing by 6. And then you have bottom up estimating technique, and that's just figuring out your work activities that go into your work packages and then adding those all together to get your final project budget and even time estimates. Just going over this again, this is analogous and or top down, and I've just provided it as just reference. So we'll go on to the next slide. So parametric estimation, again, it's using historical references to determine the characteristics, has a strong correlation with cost base, and it's in essence looking at it from whatever parameters that you throw in there and making those estimates. Moving along, this is showing you again the beta 3-point estimate and providing an example for you. Here's an example, and this one is for time. So your family's planning a trip and wants to consider the length of travel to your destination. Optimistically, you think it'll take 4 days. Most likely it's going to take 8 days. Maybe you got to stop, you got to go to the bathroom, you got to eat, things like that. So your 4 days might be if we drove straight through. And then if worst case scenario, something happens, we're considering doubling that, and so we go with 16. So you throw those values in, you have 4 plus 4 times 8 plus 16 divided by 3, and we end up figuring that most likely it's going to cost, or it's going to take 8.7 days to get the trip knocked out. Here is showing you the bottom-up technique. So it's just you're considering the costs of your activities, even the times. That fits into your work packages for your phase, and that goes towards your deliverables towards the end of the project. And so that's a reiteration or a recap of the bottom-up estimation. Here is showing you a project that, or an example that I came across, and it was a really good project example. I'll just say it was very relevant. It was an actual estimation. A project work package requires 3 programmers for 5 days, and their total cost is $10 each to complete the project. Several electrical engineers for 1 day cost $6. Now, it's $10, $6, it seems like it's little, but you got to realize that they have probably, when they've scheduled this, there's probably a whole host of electrical engineers and programs, and so that cost was scattered over several people. So that's why the value is so low. Okay, the total work package for the task is calculated by adding the product of the length of time and the price per unit for human resources. In this case, the cost estimate is 3 times 5 times 10 plus 7 times 1 times 6 to get $192. The project task success is uncertain due to a niche technology used by the programmers and their lack of experience in programming this programming task. As this is a risk, it is recommended that $15 be used to the project cost to manage the risk. This is contingency reserve, so we're throwing a lot of things in here, and this is, like I said, this is practical, real-world type of situation. So a management reserve of 10% of project costs is being used. It's added to the work package. The reserve is used to manage the unidentified risk. The project manager needs management approval to use this management reserve. So the management reserve calculation, 10% of $192 and $15 gives $207 at 10%. That would be $20. So the total project budget for this task is $192 with $15 and $21 to give a total projected with risk of $227 for this task. So at this point in the lecture, I'm going to talk about the quality management plan. Quality management plan requires three main processes. You have the quality plan itself, you have quality assurance, and then quality control. And the link at the bottom here I've supplied for you to look into. It's on YouTube for further reference and use. So, quality management plan. It includes the following: quality policies, procedures, criteria, roles, responsibilities, and the authorities, quality control activities such as testing, inspection, and validation. Provides for change control process for assessing, approving, and implementing changes, and then a communication plan. Just so you know, because this terminology did come up, the difference between an alpha test and a beta test, statistics terms. Alpha test means we are testing within the organization. So we're trying to work out the bugs before we go further on, so it goes to the customer outside of the organization. So beta testing is that testing that is done after a product has left the organization and it is in the hands of the customer and they're actually using it. Here's another term. So verification in project management, and this is very, very important, these two terms. Okay, verification refers to checking if a product or deliverable is built according to the specifications. That's verification. A lot of people, if you were to ask them what's the difference between verification and validation, they might just very well get these terminology in reverse. Okay, so validation means to confirm the product meets the needed expectations of the end user. So verification is, does it work to our specifications? Does it work to the specifications? And then validation means, does it work outside and meet the expectations? So by definition and just by default, notice that verification goes with alpha testing. Validation goes with beta testing. And so I provide this little graphic here to give an indication of how verification works with your unit tests, maybe doing some regression testing, and with beta testing and so forth, and then going outside, and then there is customer acceptance that is involved. According to PMBOK, here are the components of a quality management plan, and so I've thrown this on here just for reference. So it says you put in there project charter, tools and techniques for that, and then outputs, and so on and so forth. So these are terminology you ought to already be aware of: requirements plan, risk management, stakeholder engagement, scope baselines, assumption log, registers, stakeholder, and so on and so forth. Here's tools and techniques, and then outputs. So I put this on for reference, and I would suggest you go back and make sure you know the definitions for these. So why use a quality management plan? Because of costs. That's the underlying issue. Okay? I'll talk about before what it costs if you catch a problem within an organization compared to what it costs when it gets into the hands of the customer. It's actually called the 1-10-100 rule, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so there's a term called cost of quality, and there's 4 costs to quality. There's prevention costs. It's the cheapest. Then there's appraisal costs. That's a little bit more. Then you have internal failure costs. We figured it out, went through the process, but indeed before it went to the customer, we found it. And then there's external failure costs. That means we did everything we could. We sold the product, went out in the field, but it broke down. And so we have to deal with that plan of remedying the situation for our customer. Here is that plan I was talking about, the 1-10-100 rule. So a prevention cost is, the analogy is, it costs $1 to prevent a problem. The correction cost after the appraisal cost is $10 to fix it. And then if we have failure or the product goes out, doesn't work the way it's supposed to, with the with the customer, it's going to cost us $100. Now, be sure that you know the term cost of quality refers to costs incurred while ensuring high quality deliverables and costs resulting from imperfect deliverables. And here's how this is broken up. So costs of good quality are the prevention costs and the appraisal costs. The cost of bad quality is your internal failure costs, which has to do with rework, scrap, and delays, and then failure costs outside of your organization. That means customer returns, being on the phone with them, dealing with warranty claims, and then dealing with the perception of you've just put out a product that had low quality to it. Continuing, here's some other terminology that you should be aware of. The term of precision versus accuracy. Okay, project management. Accuracy refers to how close a project estimate or measurement is to the actual value, the target value, while precision refers to how consistent or repeatable those measurements are. Even if they aren't necessarily close to the actual value, essentially accuracy is about correctness, while precision is about being consistent. Okay, so accuracy, correctness, precision, consistency. Okay, so we look at the targets here. Here's repeatability scale, here's the accuracy scale. If we're not repeatable and we're not very accurate, and this is bullseye, we're shooting a firearm or what have you, you're all over the place, it's scattered. If you've increased your accuracy, but your repeatability hasn't necessarily improved, you get a relatively good grouping. You're in the bullseye in the center area, but you couldn't repeat this process, okay? You couldn't get to that precision level that you needed. Here is being precise but not accurate. So it's precise, we got a good grouping here, but we weren't very accurate. It wasn't where we actually wanted to be. And now here's an example of both precise and accurate. So accuracy measures how close a result is to the actual target value. It's hitting the target. Accuracy is hitting the target. Are you accurate? Yeah, I hit the target. But precision is doing it over and over again. Okay? It measures how close repeated measures are to each other. So continuing on, from PMBOK, here are the 9-point guide and best practices. In other words, what you should have for a quality management plan. Okay, so first off, you have your quality objectives. You outline those. It's a clear statement of what quality means for your project. It defines acceptable levels of performance or product specifications. It's aligned with customer with the customer and your stakeholders' expectations. It has an assumption log. An assumption means these are the things, these are premises we are going to live off of. They may not be true, they may not even be necessarily true, but that's what we're going to go with, and we're going to say at this point, this is what we're operating from. We believe these things to be true, so that's an assumption. So here's an example. Defect rates for the outcome of this project must be below 2% on all delivered components. So maybe you're putting a bicycle together, maybe you're putting a grill, developing a new smoker, what have you, and you want everything to be within 2% of defect rate. Okay, quality standards. You list the applicable industry, corporate, or regulatory standards you want to follow. For example, following ISO 9001, using Six Sigma, having to adhere to FDA regulations, and then internal corporate standards. Number 3, outline quality roles and responsibilities. This clarifies who is responsible for quality assurance, the quality control, who is going to perform that, and the approval of deliverables at the very end. So examples, your project manager, they're overall responsible for the quality. You might have a quality specialist. They do process audits. Then you might have a team lead, and they facilitate peer reviews to find out how well your team members are working. Part 4 of this 9-section guide, quality assurance activities. This details proactive processes to embed in the quality into the work. So in other words, before you go on to another process, you probably have done some type of checklist or some quality assessment to make sure and go, yes, we checked this, now it can go on. Now, that doesn't mean you remedy the quality problem, the defect, or the defective, but at least you've taken the attempt to assess it before it's moved on. So you do quality audits, you do process reviews, and most of all, you do training with people so they know what to look for. Example, conducting weekly internal audits to verify process adherence. Example, acceptable criteria for key deliverables. Okay, does this meet our acceptance criteria that we just received from a previous iteration or previous increment? Okay, number 5, quality control activities. These are the things that we are doing to explain how defects will be identified, tracked, and resolved. It focuses on inspection and testing to verify that quality standards have been met. An example, following a quality checklist, performing product testing per checklist before forwarding to the next stage or for a final delivery to customer. And then 6, quality metrics. Defines specific measurable criteria used to evaluate quality. For instance, a U-chart in quality assurance. U-chart is if you have the appropriate sample size, you inspect for different units to find out the number of defects per unit. There might even be customer satisfaction scores. If you go into Walmart and you check out and you go through the automated process, at the very end they want you to give it a 1 through 5 star rating. That would be a customer satisfaction score. Example, you're keeping track of the time to resolve issues if you're doing problem solving. Okay, that would be an internal quality metric. Or using the acceptable quality limit, AQL, sampling to ensure that you do have 2% defective rate. Next, you have quality tools and techniques. You're listing the methods, tools, or frameworks used to analyze and manage quality. Examples would be cause and effect, using fishbone diagrams, control charts, Pareto analysis, and checklists. Then continuous improvement, identifying how the team will learn, review, and enhance quality over time. Using a lessons learned workshop afterwards, after a project. That can be done. Using a fishbone chart to do root cause analysis to problem solve. And doing Kaizen events. And those are coming together and looking at a process, looking at a product, and brainstorming and figure out where did this go wrong, and then improving upon it. And then finally, documentation and reporting. This defines specific measurable criteria used to evaluate quality. Example, again, using a U-chart, customer satisfaction, and then time resolving, and then compliance requirements, training, and certification requirements. Now, I talked about assumption logs earlier, and so I threw this slide in just to make sure that you're aware of this terminology and how it's used. An assumption log in project management acts as a centralized list of things the team takes as true without concrete proof, allowing them to identify potential risks and uncertainties early on in the project to be proactive about it. So the purpose to document and track all the assumptions made during a project planning. You state these are what we hold to be true. And then content. Each assumption listed in the log should include a clear description, who's responsible for verifying, and then the current status of that issue or assumption, whether it's confirmed, negated, or still under review. When to create it? You create it anytime, pretty much during the project. but specifically if you can at the very beginning during the project initiation phase. It's very important to use, okay? It's for being proactive to eliminate problems and to give a baseline to everybody and say, this is what we are operating off of, okay? Examples of a project assumption: the required technology for this project will be available at the expected cost. Okay, maybe time goes on, there's 6 months, you got a quote, but you're still expecting it's going to be a similar cost or that cost that was quoted to you. Another example: the key stakeholders fully support the project timeline and deliverables. The budget for deliverable X is, say, $100,000 and completed by 1/31/25. And then over here I'm showing what an example of an assumption log may look like. Okay, so scheduling, budget planning, you need to be able to communicate to stakeholders and people within your team. So we've already talked about communication plans before. I will expand on it here with some other information. So, communication plan. The first part of a communication plan really is a stakeholder register. Didn't talk a lot about it before because it's kind of basic. It's just listing who your stakeholders are. And there's not a whole lot more information to it. But you use the stakeholder register to develop your communication plan. And a stakeholder register might be as simple as having the names of individuals or their organizations, their roles, their level of influence on the project, their interest in the project, their expectations regarding the project, their communication preferences relative to the plan, the communication plan, and then their potential impact on the project. And so down below I'm showing you an example of a stakeholder register. And you might want to improve upon or add to or subtract different categories to your register and therefore your communication plan. And that's dependent on the needs of your project and things like that. So in this example, we have the stakeholder name, we have their category, this is saying they're internal or external, showing you their analysis. These two are keys. Stakeholders, this is their organization or their group, so this one's senior management. Down here comes from accounting. Here's showing you their job title or the role. Here's a chief information officer. Down here, finance manager for H. Watkins. It's telling you a brief address where they're located. This might be an international type of large project. So that would be critical for the register and the communication plan to have that information. Their email addresses, their website, so you know what they look like, how communications have been sent and what's been sent to date, and then comments and notes regarding past communications with them. Something I believe I may have talked about already, but it's extremely important to understand the difference. Pretty sure you're going to get questions thrown your way regarding this. There's two types of communications. I find it astounding that lots of organizations don't know the difference between a push versus pull communication format. So a push communication is something you throw out there and you're not necessarily expecting to get a return on it. Whereas a pull communication is you're putting information out and you're wanting to get information back from somebody. So an example of push communication is an email, a memo, a report, contracts, or directives. So you throw it out there and say, here's what it is. You don't necessarily have to respond. You might have to respond and say, yeah, I got it. Now I know what it is. I've read that. Okay, so a flag comes up in the email to let you know they've received it. And so push communication is good for quick, regular communication and can be automated. It's important to limit communication to avoid overwhelming and interested with information and to neglect the disinterested. Pull communication requires the recipient to access or request information from a central source, and that could be you as the project manager. And again, this is important to understand because we are we're doing scheduling, and so we're dealing with costs and time frames and budgets and things like that. So this would be communication plan to say, we're going to throw this out. We want you to approve this, so we're going to use a pull communication technique. Pull communication is passive. The recipients can access the information at their own discretion, at their will, when they want to. Often used for managing people or for when regular updates are needed for a team or from a team or team members. Examples of this: website hosted information. It's there. You just got to access it. Policies and procedures. It's been put together. You just got to access it. You know what the policy is if you forget what it is. Work instructions. That's just verification saying here's what we're doing in the job. Part of work instructions is key when you're training people. You have informational brochures, you have knowledge repertories, you have databases, and you have information repositories. So for you visual learners like myself, I have a chart here, okay, to help understand formal versus informal communication. So effective methods of communication. Now, back in the day when I was undergrad or whatever, when you take the communications class, and as many senses that you can affect, smell, reading, writing, listening, touch, things like that, the more that you get information transference and conveyance. Okay, so some effective methods of communication. We already know this, you understand it, but I'm throwing it on here so you get a greater understanding. You have verbal communication. Problem with verbal communication is you have a conversation, but sometimes the facts aren't correct. People are throwing things out as information that aren't necessarily correct. And then a lot of times you don't remember the extent of the combination of the conversation and the details of it. Then you have written. Written means it's written. Okay, you can refer back to it and say, here was what is written. This is what was conveyed to me. Then you have face-to-face. Face-to-face is similar to verbal, but then you get to read the nonverbal cues of people, and that can be a telltale sign of what they're really thinking, how they're feeling, their understanding regarding things. And also you can hit a lot of people when you're doing face-to-face with large groups. And then you have nonverbal. Nonverbal, again, you can pick up on information that somebody might shake their head and go, yeah, I really agree with that. In reality, they might be giving you signs and go, no, I don't really. I'm just telling you yes, just to get rid of you or pacify you. So formal communications versus informal. Origin, it's deliberately structured. Spontaneous and unstructured is informal communication. The nature, if it's formal, it's well planned. You're thinking it out. Like if you are doing an employee review, you're going to sit and think about the words you're going to use because you're analyzing and reviewing somebody. You might be critical of them. Okay, so it's systematic. It's authorized. Informal communication, unplanned, unsystematic, unauthorized. Flow, prescribed through chain of command for formal information. It's unofficial with informal information. Flexibility can be rigid. Informal is flexible. Authority, official channels for formal. Unofficial for informal. Purpose, when it's formal, to achieve business objectives. Informal, for personal satisfaction, personal needs. The speed, it takes time for formal communication. For informal communication, it's often quick, fast, off the top of your head. Accuracy, for formal, has to be accurate, has to be legal, has to be authentic, has to be referenced. Informal can be distorted, can be poor information provided, things like that. Formal can be oral or written, and for informal, it's usually just oral, and then source, for formal, it can be traced, and then informal, it can't be traced. So the Racky chart, it's thrown on here. Why? Because you're doing scheduling. Okay, you're going to have to talk to people and say, okay, can we get this done in a certain time? What are the resources you think you'll need to have? And so that's why a Iraqi chart, especially if it's a large project, you need to know who's responsible, who's accountable, uh, who's been consulted, and then who needs to be informed about it. So I've already talked about this at length, and so I'm just throwing it on here because it is a part of the scheduling process. Okay, so the communications plan. You may want to keep track of your communications and how well they went with team members and even stakeholders. So there is something called a mood chart, and a mood chart is a metric to help the project manager keep track of personalities of stakeholders and team members and things like that. So it's a simple chart, and really it's a visual, and it's going to tell you how well your team member was on the day of the week that you worked with them, if they were favorable, happy, approachable, if they were neutral, ambivalent, you couldn't approach them or could approach them, or they were just not a happy camper. So that's what a mood chart is. I've also talked about stakeholder salience model and for communication plan use, and that's again something you might want to incorporate in the communication plan just to have some sense of urgency and their power, their dominancy, and their legitimacy in the project. And with that said, you should know project scheduling and planning, the 10 components: work breakdown schedule dictionary, types of software that you can use for scheduling and planning, terminology that goes with scheduling and planning: phase, work package, task, activity, milestone, and critical path, the 4 types of dependencies, and then budgeting concerns: activity cost estimates, activity contingency reserve, work package estimates, work package contingency reserves, control accounts and how they relate to earned value management, management reserves, cost baselines, project budgeting techniques, analogous, which is then top down, parametric, 3-point, know the formula for that, and then bottom up. And then quality management plans for scheduling and planning. Know the 9 components. Understand or know what cost of quality is and the 4 levels of it. Know the difference between precision and accuracy. And then realize that you're going to have a communication plan for team scheduling and budgeting and planning. Know the difference between push versus pull communication and formal versus informal communication, and which of these should be used. Have a Iraqi chart for your team members. And then understand mood charting and salience model usage. And with that, I'll look for you at the next lecture. Thank you very much. Take care. Goodbye now.